Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar, How to Increase Recruiting Productivity Through the Ease of Automation. I'm Molly, and I'm here with 10th Street's Director of Implementation and Account Management, Kim, and an Account Manager, Natalie. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to join us. We have some really great information to share today that will show you how to automate the work your team does every day so you can realize a new level of recruiting success. Before we get started, though, I wanted to let you know that this webinar will be recorded and sent to you within the next 24 hours. So don't worry if you get interrupted or have to jump off the call. You'll get the recording sent straight to your email address tomorrow so you can review it at your convenience. Additionally, please submit your questions at any time throughout the presentation. You can do so using the text box under the questions section in your GoToWebinar panel. We'll answer as many as we can during our Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Today, we will be starting from the beginning of the application process and walking you all the way through to hire. Kim and Natalie will show you how to use automation to respond to new applicants, apply tags from responses on the IntelliApp, conduct complex application routing and reassignment, score upon application submission, process emails, processes to trigger multiple events, create a status change, request and resend employment verification requests, run adverse action processes, send offer letters, and automate reports. We will wrap up with a Q&A session, so make sure you are submitting any questions you might have through the panel on your screen. With all of that being said, I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over to Natalie and let her get this webinar started.
Awesome. Well, first, I just wanted to start by all the items we're kind of going to cover today. Most items are kind of free and going to be included for everyone. There are going to be some things that do have additional fees included, so just feel free to touch base with your account manager or your advisor, and they can kind of let you know along the way. Anything that you want to get set up that we talk about today, just reach out to your account manager at account.managers@10street.com. We've got some new logic behind the scenes where that will automatically route now to your designated account manager or account manager team. So we can get all of that taken care of for you now. So the first thing here with automation is we can set up automation that will instantly kind of respond to new applicants as they come into the dashboard. So you can set up a generic email that will automate out from the company as a whole. So you could set up a generic email that would say, you know, thank you for applying. We're reviewing your application, kind of some basic information about your company, you know, a company description or something like that. Or you could set up the email to be more personalized from the recruiter that's going to be assigned to the subject. And it could, you know, have the same type of information, but it could have that specific recruiter's contact information, and more of, you know, language that would come from that recruiter, and those can be managed in the edit users tool as well. So you can edit the responses from each individual recruiter there. So you can do that either way. You can't do both, but you can do either one. And those emails will go out for full applications or leads that come into the dashboard for those. And then we can go to the next slide, Molly. You can also apply tags as they come in from the IntelliApp. So think about things that you'd want to search or report off of later in the process. So the most common things there would be like the how did you hear about us question on the app. So if you want to be able to search off that information or report to see like where are these people hearing from us aside of using refer codes, you could take that how did you hear about us question and have that pre-fill a tag, like a heard about us tag. You could use that for the driver referral if they're putting in names there for the referral code. Think about anything on that general information, that custom question page of your application that you would want to pre-fill a tag, and we can configure that for you as well. Next slide. We can also set up automation that can automatically assign the recruiter and the work list. So you can set this up in a few different ways. The most common ways to assign the recruiter and the work list would be based on custom questions in the application. You can say, you know, if what location are you applying for, should always assign a specific work list, and then that work list is always assigned to a specific recruiter. We can set up routing that way. You can set up routing to kind of evenly distribute across your recruiters. So the most common would be setting up a round robin between IntelliApp, so that way your full applications are evenly distributed between your recruiters, and then a secondary round robin to evenly distribute leads. So that way, you know, you're not getting those kind of complaints of, well, this person's getting more full applications and I'm getting more leads. You can separate those out. But we can also do more custom type routing if you have your recruiters separated by state. Maybe a group of recruiters do recruiting in Texas versus another recruiting group does Florida. You can separate that out by state. And sources, there's tons of options as far as routing goes. So if you have something specific, we can assign the recruiter. And by recruiter, some companies do refer to that a different way. So whoever is the person that's responsible for taking that app, it could be primary assigned, it could be a terminal manager, whoever that person is that the application is assigned to when it initially comes into the dashboard. And the same thing with the work list. So we can assign that based on a custom question, or it can just be routing behind the scenes the same way. If it's every time something comes in from Texas, it should always be assigned based on that. It doesn't have to be a custom question on the application as well. So, and again, if you want to set that up, just contact your account manager. We can set up scoring based on questions on the application. So scoring is visible in the dashboard on the work list view. So scoring is used for the recruiter to kind of help manage their day or their workflow. So the idea behind scoring is that the recruiter should kind of reach out to that person that has the highest score first, right? That highest score should be the person that's the most qualified potentially to work for your company, ideally. And, you know, in the type of world we're living in today, the drivers are really hard to come by, right? So you'd want to kind of set up scoring geared on your hiring criteria. So if you require flatbed experience, for example, have a question on your app geared toward, do you have flatbed experience, or you have X number of flatbed experience? Have the score based on that, and then the recruiters know, okay, when this person has 100, they answered that question the way it needed to be, and I'm going to reach out to that guy first. Anytime there's 100, they're more likely to be qualified, right, to drive for us. And the idea there is that they can reach out to those guys first. It's going to just kind of help organize their day. They're kind of in the work list tab, going from, you know, you can set the score in different ways. But you can score based on a combination of questions. I would recommend fewer the better, 1 to maybe 2 to 3 questions for scoring. And then the recruiter can kind of go down the list. You know what, there's a score of 100, there's a score of 80, etc., and they can see that score and prioritize it and sort the most qualified first to kind of work their way down the list. They are still going to have to contact, though, anybody with a lower score. And even if they have a lower score, doesn't necessarily mean that they're not qualified. Just means they may have answered the question depending on how your scoring is set up. If that makes sense. We can also automate emails out of the dashboard. So you can set up process emails. So from the process tab in the dashboard, when you're looking at a subject, you can set up standard process emails. So these couldn't be edited. They would be set up, and in the dashboard, you can pull in tags to be included in these emails. They can include attachments. You know, they would pull in the driver's name, their address. They could include the recruiter, and they would just you would run the process and it would send an email to the applicant. So in these examples, if you had a lead that came in the dashboard, a short form, maybe it was a partial application, they didn't finish it, you could run a process that said invitation to complete full app and click start, and it would send an email out to the subject, however you had that configured, where it could say, please, click the link below to complete a full application. If you have any questions, here's your recruiter, and provide all the extra details there to get them to complete a full app. Or you could include the full offer letter in the email out to them. You can configure those however you would like. Kind of the beauty behind these versus a template from the communications view is that it couldn't be edited, right? You would have control. You would know that, any user can't just go in and make whatever changes they wanted to it. You would set that template and it couldn't be changed.
Great. Well, I'm going to jump in here and pick up from this point till the end of the presentation. But again, thanks for everybody for joining us. We're happy that you took time out of your day to learn about some of this automation. When we're talking about automation, it's always good to have communication internally with your team, because if there's all these pieces and parts that are triggering different things, it's important for your recruiters, processors, your safety people to know what's happening when, so there's no confusion or miscommunication internally or with your applicants. As Natalie mentioned earlier, some of the items we're talking about are included in your basic service package, such as things like scoring and auto response emails. Some of the more complex items that I'm going to talk about could be part of an extra module that you may or may not subscribe to today. So if there's any questions about any of this as we go through or after the presentation, you can follow up with your account manager or advisor, and they'll be happy to help you and answer some questions about what is or is not included in your service that you subscribe to. So when we're talking about triggering events, processes and status changes can trigger things to happen in the system as well, which is pretty cool. Processes, when I talk about processes, I'm talking about going into the add process area, like where you're used to ordering background screening reports or scheduling communications like electronic forms or videos out to drivers. So processes can be set up to do certain things. So say a recruiter goes into the process area and they want to run a process, and that process is going to change a subject status. And it can also trigger an email out to the applicant. It can apply a tag. So in the example that we reference here on this slide is orientation scheduled. So I could run a process that changes status to orientation scheduled. It applies the orientation scheduled tag with a yes value. It sends an email out to the driver with information about orientation, and it could also schedule a communication out through the portal so the driver can complete new hire paperwork or watch certain training videos that you want them to watch. So a process can do all of those things. It can also happen with a status change. So by changing the status manually to orientation scheduled, then I could apply the tag, send the email, and schedule the forms. So it's pretty flexible. It's just that you'll want to think about what these triggers would be, what makes sense for your organization, and what's going to be easy for your internal people to understand. But we like to talk about automation because we want to eliminate all of the manual tasks that you have to do every day and try to find ways to speed up the process so you can hire drivers faster, and so your internal people aren't working through all of these manual tasks and it taking so long to get through the process. So these are just a couple of examples with processes and status changes of the different levels of things you can accomplish there. Molly, you can move on to the next slide. So more examples of status change automations. I don't know if everybody's familiar with checklists, but inside of the system, we have the ability to create checklists. And checklists can show you by red light, green light, if certain documents are present in the Documents tab, if certain tags are applied with specific values, or even if certain processes have been run, such as ordering background screening reports. So you can set up as many checklists as you like. Some people like to set them up based upon like different departments. So maybe recruiting might have a checklist that's separate from safety. But based upon the items that you choose in your checklist, they're going to get a red light or a green light. Red light obviously means that item isn't present. Green light means it is present. So by setting up the checklist, then we have some flexibility in the system to either stop things from happening or start things to happen. So for checklist validation, if you wanted to have a process that maybe a driver's status couldn't be changed to hired unless these list of things were present in the system, you can restrict the status of hired, so nobody has access to manually change the status to hired, but instead you could have a process that changes the status to hired, but only if those checklist items are green. If you don't want to go down the restricted status avenue, then you could have a status change that's, you know, strictly looking for those things to be present. And then if they're good to go, the status moves through and changes as you would expect. Status changes can also trigger emails. So maybe an example of that might be if you have a driver that's out of your hiring area and you're going to move on to the next person, but you want to send them a quick email to let them know that they're not going to be able to come to work for you because they're out of your hiring area. That status change could trigger an email that goes out with a brief message explaining what's going on, and then the driver's aware that they're out of your hiring area. Status change to orientation scheduled, like we talked about, that could trigger an email to go out with orientation information on where to show up and what to bring and different things like that. So that's a pretty cool feature as well. The status changes triggering the training, scheduling forms or videos to be going out in the portal for the driver to complete before they come in for orientation. Status changes can also work in response to verifications of employment. So there are some triggers in the background that can be set to auto send out verifications based upon certain criteria that you can define. And it can also trigger auto resends in the background. So that kind of gets you a jump start on trying to get those VOEs completed. Statuses, of course, like we talked about, has also the ability to apply tags. And by applying tags, I'm meaning it can move a tag from the left to the right and apply it. So if you have a series of tags that you find are important, that you want the recruiter to remember to apply a value to every single time they're working a candidate, once the status changed, then those tags that you're concerned about can move over to the right so they're visible, and the recruiter can just go down the list and assign values to them based upon the different things, whether they're dates or they're yes, no's or what have you. At least it helps the recruiter know which tags need to be defined and coded with a value for your reporting purposes. Next slide. So we talked a little bit about the verification of employments, but there's a feature that primary contacts have access to in their settings where they can set up criteria for the auto requesting and auto resending of VOEs. That really helps get a jump start on things. We're not going to send out verifications if the driver has their most recent employer where they've asked us not to contact that most recent employer. Those won't go out, but there's status criteria that you can choose to set up when things would go out automatically. So if there's things like network requests, those types of things could be triggered. And there's lots of different features in there that you can set criteria around to help you start that process and continue to do resends on verifications if you haven't received a response from the previous employer. We also have a VOE integration with Assurant. So if you're using Assurant for background screening reports, there's also a feature available where they can assist you with getting verifications of employment. A lot of times, I'm sure you've come across examples where you're trying to reach out to maybe a smaller company, a mom and pop place, and it's really difficult to get the information. And maybe it's a situation where you want to send that one over to Assurant to try to get completed. There's a feature in the system that can get that over to them for them to basically go and get that verification for you. So there's a couple of options there that'll help with verifications and automating that process. So I encourage you to look into those things if you're not using them today. If you have been using the Assurant verification option, you can see that when you go into the process exchange area, you'll have an option to choose Assurant if you have this set up. And then there's some exchange controls that kind of help you define when you want to send things over to Assurant, or I mean, you could choose to send everything over there, but you can be picky and choosy about what you want to send and choose along those lines. So that's a nice option that's available. Next slide. And finally, adverse action. And a lot of companies struggle with this process because there's so many things to consider when you're talking about pre and post adverse action letters, and making sure that those are getting out the door and getting in drivers' hands or applicants' hands when they're not going to be considered for a position. The system, there's an extra module, the adverse action module, that you can set up, and this one is an additional fee if you're not subscribed to it. But the system can help you automate the process of sending out those letters instead of having to depend on, you know, snail mail and then printing out all that documentation and sending it off to the driver. The system can automate that for you and get those emails sent with those letters out to the drivers when you're disqualifying people for things that are contained in a background screening report that you ran. This really is helpful to maintain your compliance. It really eases the burden of having to deal with it all on paper. And it just makes it a lot easier to track as well. So this is a really good feature. If you haven't tried it, it might be something to consider as you're going forward. To set it up, we just need a copy of your pre and post adverse action letters, and then kind of get some criteria about who's going to be doing this process, and we'll set up things in the background and get you going with that. So that's a really nice feature to have available. The last thing that we're going to talk about is scheduler reports. A lot of people don't know that this exists as well. But when we have either standard reports or custom reports built in the system, you can set them up with criteria and have them emailed out to you on whatever kind of basis that you wish. So for example, if you wanted to receive an orientation report of everybody scheduled for orientation a certain date range, we can set that up and have it scheduled to drop in your email box, you know, Monday morning when you come into work. So then you have that list already available to you in your email when you show up on Monday morning. There's lots of different options that we can look at as far as scheduler reports, but if we have a report built and you can define the criteria, we can usually work to set that up on a scheduler so it gets emailed out to you or a group of people that you define on a basis that you define as well. So that's a pretty cool thing, time saver, instead of having to manually go in and run those reports yourself. Molly, are we on the question and answer slide now?
Yes, I
Yes,
think
very cool. Well, I see that there is some questions in here, so I'll just try to jump in, try to answer a few of them while we were going in the chat, but let's talk through some of these and see if we have some question. So again, there's some questions about, whether or not these different things are part of your existing service. And again, I would suggest that you follow up with your account manager or advisor if there's any of these things that are of interest to you. Some of the things we talked about are a part of the package, and then sometimes there might be some additional things, and you'll just have to check with your account manager or advisor, and they'll be able to help you with that. If you want to see some examples or talk about some specific examples of some of these things, we might have some ways to show you that. Basically, if you have some things that you're interested in doing and you think it might fall into one of these avenues, we'd be happy to sit down and talk to you about it and see if there's a way that we can automate something. There's certainly some flexibility outside of the things that we discussed here today, but if you have some specific examples of things that you're trying to kind of ease the pain on, we'd love to chat with you about it and see if there's some creative solutions that we can provide for you. Let's see, looking through the list here.
I was just going to add,
So
somebody asked if they were going to receive a recording, and it'll be about 24 hours. I believe Molly said at the beginning, you'll get the recording of this tomorrow afternoon.
yes, it takes a little bit to process, but at 3 o'clock Central Time tomorrow, you'll get the email.
Good deal. And so as far as there's some questions about the scheduler reports and where you can access those. So different users might have different access, but primaries have access to a reports tab, and lots of users do too. And there might be a certain set of reports in your reports tab when you're logged into the system. Any of the reports there, we could discuss setting up on a scheduler. The reports that are in the reports tab are run manually today, but if there's something of interest to you that you want to set up on a scheduler, we can certainly see what the options are and see about setting that up. We would just need to talk through it and kind of define the criteria, and then we could look at getting that set up on a scheduler for you. There was a question about advertising and how to, if there's any pieces of the system that we can use to advertise and get more drivers. Yes, that's not something we were talking about today, but just to answer the question, yes, we have a job store in the system that you can use and set up to get leads. We have a job store, we have a concierge service where we can meet with you, and that's a free service. They can go through and help guide you in advertising and point you in the right directions depending on what you're looking for. So if you're interested in something like that and want some more information about job store or concierge, feel free to reach out. Let's see what else there is in there. Natalie, did anything jump out at you in the list? Trying to scroll.
I don't think so. A few of the individual ones I tried to answer while you were going through some of them. Most of them were just like questions on how to set up things. And most of the answers to that were just reaching out to their account manager to get the setup information. Most things around scoring and the process emails, what they needed to set up for that. So just make sure to reach out to your account manager.
Yeah, and any of the emails that we kind of refer to, like out of hiring area emails or orientation scheduled emails, we don't have like standard templates for those, but if there's something that you normally send today, like maybe a recruiter sending it out of their Outlook or something, we can set that up in the system so it's a template and you can just use it where the individuals don't have to do that in their Outlook or do it outside of the system. So if you have something like that that you want to share with us, we can use that to create those templates for you. Let's see. And then as far as the VOEs go, all of that automation, that's something that if you're primary contact on the account, you're the one that would have the ability to set that up and pick the criteria that you want to use for that automation. So that's something, if you're a recruiter or processor on the call, speak to your primary contact, and then they can reach out to us if they can't find the feature or if they need help or have questions about it. We can assist with that setup. I think that about covers it. There's a lot of different questions, but a lot of them covered the same stuff. So Molly, is there anything else you can see in here that I might have missed or anything else we need to cover?
I haven't really. There are questions. Someone said they don't know who their account manager is. What's the best way for them to find that out maybe or contact?
Oh, awesome. That's a good one. I missed that one. So when you're logged into the system, if you click on your name in the top right corner and go to settings, you'll have a list in there of your account manager and your account advisor and contact information for them as well.
Awesome. Well, I think we might have been able to wrap this one up a little early unless there's anything else you all can think of.
I think that we are good. I would just encourage you to reach out and we can have some conversations about some of this stuff. You know, the more bells and whistles that you add to it, it gets complicated. So we'll want to have some conversations and talk about what steps we would take to get this all set up and make sure that we're communicating with our internal teams as well, so they're aware of what triggers are going to happen when, to keep things simple and not confusing. But this is definitely some of the stuff that we love to have conversations about, and we want to try to automate as much as possible to make things as fast as possible and easy as possible for everybody involved. So we appreciate your time today and really appreciate you taking time out of the day to join us, and we hope to talk to you again soon, and I hope everybody has a great rest of the day.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.